what's going on in the United States. The latest news is that the U.S. Senate Foreign Relation Committee has approved an initiative to designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. And what's going on? They're talking not just about Russia, they're talking about China supporting Russia, and they're trying to, put China in that position as well.
Mhm.
What's going on, and how is it that going to help the United States and the position they're making in order, if they want to help Ukraine, is that going to help Ukraine in your opinion?
No, it's not going to help Ukraine. It's not going to help anybody, but in their own fevered, maniacal minds. This A lot of this comes from this idea of maximalist, of putting so much pressure. It comes out of the efforts that were done in the first Trump administration on maximalist pressure on Iran, and this really mistaken revisionist belief that it was successful. And that if not for the Biden administration, Iran would have collapsed by now, and there would have been regime change there, and Iranian people would be free, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, completely unfounded. One, because the Biden administration didn't reduce, any of the pressure on Iran, but also two, just because it simply doesn't have that effect. But the idea being is that this is how we have to go through the world. That we have to apply the full weight of the United States. That we've been too soft. We have to take the gloves off. And so the idea of designating Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism allows more sanctions to be placed on Russia, allows more limitations on interaction with Russia. It precludes a whole heck of a lot, and this is a backdoor way of circumventing or foiling negotiations with Russia to end the war in Ukraine, as well as larger security issues. If you designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, then the United States cannot negotiate with Russia on arms control. So how do you extend the New START treaty that's going to end in February 2026? Well, most of these men and women in Congress don't want to see the New START treaty extended. They don't want to see nuclear weapons capped at 1,500 warheads each. They want to be, a bonanza, right? And just allow the weapons companies and the nuclear industry to be back at the trough, right, of unbridled arms race. So there's a lot of motives here. There's a lot of reasons for it. There's a lot of hidden hands involved in this. But it comes back to this fever, this mania, this insanity in Washington D.C. that it's an imperial one. Certainly, the idea that the United States cannot allow any challenge to its dominance, that it cannot accept any type of affront or any type of impertinence, or that it cannot get its way, then that's an imperial one. You would have seen that in Rome 2,000 years ago, kind of thing. You would have seen it in London 150 years ago, right? I mean, so some of this is just natural, organic to empire. Other aspects of it are peculiar to the United States and to those types we have here in power, like Lindsey Graham, who is one of the chief proponents of these types of things. This, of course, is going along with or in parallel to the desire by Graham, and I think he has more. I think he has 75 co-sponsors in the Senate to put 500% tariffs on anyone who is importing Russian oil. Right, so the Indians, say the Turks, whoever, would have 500% tariffs put on them. And just to finally cap it off, this is, as often occurs, conjoined with action. So as we saw in this last week, the explosions at the Romanian and Hungarian right oil facilities that have been taking in Russian oil. All this is part of an overall plan that they believe will somehow push Russia to collapse. It's not even about getting Russia to negotiate an end to the war. These people don't care about that. They don't care about seeing an end. Actually, I would expect many of them want to see the war continue for a whole bunch of reasons, whether it's the profits of the weapons industry or because they like the idea of Russian soldiers being killed. But what they think this type of pressure will do will isolate Russia, will make its economy hurt, and that ultimately there'll be such pressures on Russia that its government will collapse and then the Americans and the West will finally have won the great victory in Russia they've been trying to achieve since the 1990s.
Matt, the Trump administration, they've been in power. It's been 10 months, almost 10 months they're in power in the United States. So far, what's your assessment on them? Can Trump, this is the question that I ask our audience who are watching us right now. Can Trump deliver peace? Do you see any sort of sign that this administration would go in that direction?
I don't know. I mean, Donald Trump loves to throw out that stat. I think he's now up to 8 wars he has ended. I mean, according to him, when people pull that apart, it gets completely debunked. He's still claiming he solved the war in Congo, and Congo, is what I'm reading, is as bloody as it's ever been. I mean, but we're dealing with a man who's in his own reality, and people around him in a movement that see themselves as revolutionaries. Right. So the idea of the world that they're creating, oftentimes for people like that, it has its own lexicon. It has its own meaning. And so what does peace mean to them? We can certainly go back and look at what Tacitus reports, Germanicus, I believe it was Germanicus, the Scottish chieftain. I guess they were Caledonians back then, who, said of the Romans, they create a desert and declare it peace. I mean, is that essentially what we have here? That's what we have certainly with the Israeli-American understanding of what's occurring in Gaza. They've destroyed Gaza. Gaza is gone, essentially. I mean, 2+ million people are still there, but Gaza as a physical location in terms of any relation to what once was is gone. And that they declare peace, right? I mean, so not the Palestinians in Gaza, excuse me, but the Israelis, Americans. So, whether or not they actually want peace, these revolutionaries who are in power, the MAGA movement, the America First movement, Trump and his cabinet, however you want to describe them as, is a good question. And, you see the way that Trump vacillates on things, and you see the way that he has no principles, that he is not anchored in anything. He is incredibly malleable. I mean, we could talk about Ukraine, right? And the way he goes from going into the meeting with Putin in Anchorage back in August, where, we need a ceasefire, to coming out of that meeting, no ceasefire, to just this past week, we need a ceasefire again, right? And that supposedly is what scuttled the talks between him and Putin that were scheduled in Hungary. Hungary, of course, that's a whole other thing we can get into, how anyone expected Putin to get to Hungary overflying all the EU nations. I don't know, but again, these are people who live in their own reality, right? So I don't know, so the whole thing is just madness that we're trying to comprehend. Right. We're trying to approach irrational people. Again, people who view themselves as revolutionaries. We would refer to them as reactionaries, but who see themselves as revolutionaries. We're trying to understand them. We're trying to decipher. And it's really difficult to do. And, all of us who are trying to do this, we all need to give ourselves a break and lessen the pressure off of us if we're not perfect or we don't get things correct, because we have, at least in my life, never seen an administration, a government that is like the one we have right now in terms of its just lack of adherence to anything other than, as my friend Karen Kiratoski said just today in an email, she described it as profit seeking. This is the goals of this administration: profit seeking, cronyism, and cheap wars overseas for natural resources. That seems to be the principles or the goals or the foundation upon which this government adheres to. And I think that's probably it, right? I mean, so it's tough to understand whether or not they really want peace or not. And one final thing is that certainly this idea of Donald Trump wanting the Nobel Peace Prize, that seems to be real. That doesn't seem to be something exaggerated, right? That doesn't seem to be like just some kind of rumor that was cooked up, or some story, or some, just little part of presidential lore, like William H. Taft once couldn't get out of the bathtub.
He's dead serious about that.
Yeah, he's serious, dead serious about it. And so that then comes into this calculation of, what will Donald Trump do with respect to Israel and Iran. Certainly, the Israelis want the Americans to take part in a war again in Iran. And, whether or not that would preclude Donald Trump from getting the Nobel Peace Prize in, next October, that's a real factor. I mean, it's insane that we're saying this and that this is a thing that we have to really contend with, but it's actually true. Whether he really wants peace, I don't know. I think the for these men and women in power, it goes to the Dostoevsky quote about how power and blood is humiliating, how tyranny is organic, how very often men and women who come into contact with it find it intoxicating. And I think that's what you have here. And I would say, just to continue rambling on, moving to Venezuela, the goal, as I think, is as I view more what's happening in Venezuela, and I could be proven wrong in a few hours tonight when it gets dark and the U.S. launches an invasion or something. But I don't think that's the case. One, I don't think the forces are there for such a thing. But also, two, I think this is a type of government. These are the type of men and women who like the theater. They like the optics of killing people in speedboats. They like being able to once a week release the video of another boat getting destroyed by a Hellfire missile or whatever. They like that. There's a Tom Clancy-esque aspect to all this that they enjoy. And I think that is what they're going after here, more than actual regime change, certainly more than any occupation of Venezuela. If they could get regime change in Venezuela, then, so be it. God bless it for them, right? Venezuela, of course, has been a target for the neoconservatives, particularly the Republicans, for decades now. This has been an obsession of Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. And Venezuela, of course, also has the world's largest oil reserves. So, I mean, you put all this together, in this very long-winded response, and you still come to a point with regards to Trump as to whether or not he wants peace or not, as something as, how he's feeling at whatever time during the day. And this is why this administration is so incredibly dangerous.
Exactly. Here is Matt. You mentioned the situation in Venezuela. Here is what Rand Paul said about Venezuela.
There is no fentanyl made in Venezuela. Not just a little bit. There's none being made in Venezuela. These are outboard boats that, in order for them to get to Miami, would have to stop and refuel 20 times. They're in all likely going to Trinidad and Tobago, which is an island right off of the coast of Venezuela. So there's a lot of reasons to be worried about this. But number one is the broader principle of, when can you kill people indiscriminately? When you're at war. That's why when we declare war, it's supposed to be done by Congress. It's supposed to be thoughtful. It's supposed to be debated. And we're not supposed to do it willy-nilly. And then when you have war, you just kill people in the war zone. And even then there are rules of engagement. But interdicting drugs has always been a criminal activity and a criminal anti-crime sort of activity, where we don't just summarily execute people. We actually present evidence and convict them.
Matt, what's happening considering Donald Trump himself? These people, Rand Paul was one of them who was supporting, one of the few Republicans supported Donald Trump during the Russia Gate. And we have Thomas Massie, we have Marjorie Taylor Greene. These people are part of the Republican Party who supported Donald Trump. Right now, they don't agree with what Donald Trump is doing. And it seems Donald Trump feels so much closer to Lindsey Graham than these people.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Isn't
and
that a concern in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, and that's not the way it was supposed to be, right? I mean, a core tenet of Donald Trump's MAGA movement is America first. And certainly men and women like his vice president, J.D. Vance, or his director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who we've heard nothing from in the last several months. I was told she was brought out for a Diwali ceremony, and that was it, So you have this abandonment of this principle of putting America's interests at the top of our agenda. And that's simply not shown to be the case. I mean, we could talk about this $40 billion bailout from Argentina. That's not even meant to shore up the Argentinian economy, right? I mean, Trump himself has said it. It all hinges on the upcoming elections as to whether or not this money goes through or whether there'll be any additional support. So it shows that it's just a political, it's cronyism, as Karen Kwiatkowski said, profit-seeking cronyism and cheap wars overseas for natural resources. I love that she wrote that to me today, because I feel like I need to quote it all over the place, because they feel like she really nailed it in terms of putting together what is the agenda here. And so you see these outliers in the Republican Party who've not given up their principles, who've not traded their beliefs for a comfortable spot either in the administration or guaranteed campaign support. And so that's why you'll see such efforts against Rand Paul, Thomas Massie, Marjorie Taylor Greene. And we've had this in the past. I mean, certainly when George W. Bush was president, you had Rand Paul's father, Ron Paul, leading the efforts against the Iraq War. Walter Jones, the late congressman from North Carolina, who I'm blessed to have been able to call him a friend. Mr. Jones, after turning around from his initial support for that war, went against the war. And he paid severely in Congress in terms of just being able to hold on to his seat, but also never holding any of the seniority positions he should have held, because he was going to go with his principles and not what was best for either George W. Bush or John Boehner or whoever else, in the Republican leadership. So what you see with Greene, Massie, Paul is pretty rare. And, you could see with Paul in particular and Massie, I don't know Greene as well, but these are men who are libertarians. So they are in their own outlier section of the Republican Party. They are not mainstream GOP by any means. They are traditionally anti-war. They are traditionally very much civil libertarians. And so with Paul in his comments, in addition to what we just heard him talking to Piers Morgan, he makes his point about how can you murder somebody without even knowing their names? We're killing people in these speedboats. We don't even know what their names are. And he uses the point that is incredibly un-American to do such a thing, to carry out such an act like that, to execute somebody without, knowing that person's name. I mean, that's the height of a lack of due process. So, it's good that we still have these men and women like Massie and Paul and Greene. It's a shame that you see so few of these on the Democratic Party side. I mean, you have efforts by the Democrats to try and restrict what Donald Trump is doing with regards to these strikes in the Caribbean. And actually now today, they hit a boat in the Pacific that was coming from Colombia. So now it's a multi-ocean war on drugs here. But so Tim Kaine, Rand Paul put forward basically a war powers resolution, that seeks to curtail the president's ability to conduct these operations. And that's going to go the same way all the other war powers resolutions have gone. And the Democrats know that, and that's all they'll do. And so there won't be any real effort at undermining this. There won't be any real effort at, say, blocking any of Trump's other actions, whether it's, blocking funding for this type of thing. There won't be any of that. It'll be just like as we saw with the opposition throughout all other aspects of war or the previous administrations who have just tremendously violated civil liberties, American civil liberties. So, I think we've seen the same script in terms of what we can expect from Congress on this. It's just that Donald Trump is providing a lot more color and flavor to it in a way that we haven't seen before.